Welcome to the Rossmoor Interfaith Council's Big Questions, the Purpose of Life, with Sister Marylin Lacey today. As we come together, let us do this land and labor acknowledgement. As we acknowledge the lands on which we work, serve, and play, let us remember the first inhabitants of these lands. We acknowledge that Contra Costa County is also the ancestral homes of the Bay, Miwok, Ohlone, and Tachyokuts people. And yes, we'll turn on some live transcription for the hearing impaired. That should be on now. We acknowledge that Contra Costa County is also the ancestral homes of the Bay, Miwok, Ohlone, and Tachyokuts people, with each group having their own relationship with the highest peak that the colonizers called Mount D. We acknowledge the wisdom held by these human ancestors and their relationship to this land, and we seek to learn from their long stewardship. This land was forcibly taken from indigenous people, and the violence that occurred then and continues now is a source of grief and shame. Acknowledging this past, we also want to work towards racial justice now and for the future in a way that we as people of faith live on this land, which includes revisioning the way we humans see our place in the world, how we interact with each other, as well as other species. We seek to learn from the plants and other animals who currently inhabit this habitat and those displaced or lost through violence and land mismanagement. Otters, beavers, grizzlies, antelope, chub, and kangaroo, rat, thistle, grass, and tule. As people of faith and people of good conscience, justice means moving from exploitation to recognizing interdependence at all levels of being and recognizing the other animals as relations. We must also acknowledge that this country was built on the free, enslaved labor of Black people and that labor was violently enforced for hundreds of years. Let's honor the legacy of the African diaspora and Black life, knowledge and skills stolen due to white supremacy, and especially as Californians, let us also recognize the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the stolen labor or low-paid labor of many Chinese immigrants who were welcome for their labor but not to stay. With this acknowledgement, let's recognize a duty to give honor through our work and continue to stand up for racial and social justice every day. Let's remember our purpose as a council in organizing against the forces of all forms of supremacy, in aligning ourselves, body, mind, and soul, with the people of color-led organizations that will lead us all into the future we imagine for ourselves and generations to come. We welcome Sarah Blackstock, who's going to give us an introduction. Please unmute yourself, Sarah.
Wait just a few minutes on that, and you can show it. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello, welcome. Good to see some people that have been with us for not only this year, but perhaps some of you, I think, have been tuning in for the last 5 years. This is the last big questions of this year. And I really look forward to hearing Sister Marylin Lacey representing Progressive Catholicism. Over this year, we have explored our big question: what is the purpose of life? For those of you who have attended the 9 sessions this year, we've had the opportunity to listen to 9 responses to the following religions, from the following religions: Ananda, Islam, Baha'i, Sufi, Buddhism, Methodist, Latter-day Saints, Judaism, and Sikh. If we gave out certificates for attendance and you attended all of the sessions, you would have earned about 15 hours in a crash course in comparative religion. I'm being silly, of course. But my point is that you have taken the opportunity to learn about the most essential aspect of living, in my opinion, and in my experience, religion and spirituality. Today, we end this year of exploration and learning with Sister Marylin Lacey representing Progressive Catholicism. But first, let us thank Susie Cole, who is the president of the Rossmoor Interfaith Council, and Reverend Will McGarvey, who is our Zoom host and the executive director of the Contra Costa County Interfaith Council. Also, thanks to the other Big Questions Committee members, Ruth Ahern, Gloria Sunshine, and Channing Miller. And thank you to Channel 28, our Rossmoor channel, for recording and producing DVDs of these sessions. We actually have an archive covering maybe 3 to 4 years of our big questions. And last but not least, and he said for me not to say anything about him, and of course I'm going to, I must say a thank you to my wonderful husband, Bob Blackstock, who was a lawyer and therefore a wordsmither. So he has been my chief editor all the way through. And he probably would be shocked if he knew that I was talking about him. He's an introvert. So our committee is going to be considering the next big question for 2022. And we welcome your input on if you have some big questions that you'd like us to consider. So just to summarize this past year's, you could put that up now if you will, Will. Just to summarize this past year, here's a quick summary, a statement from each of the presentations. Thank you. Of course, in speaking on behalf of their religion, each presenter relies on their own experience of that religion. So as you see, Ananda, which is Paramahansa Yogananda, the purpose of life, seek to love and be loved, use our power of choice for good. Self-realization leads to knowing God. From Islam, Nazir Ahmad, to serve, to be a mirror of the invisible and a witness before God. From the Baha'i, Bob Henderson, allow the Holy Spirit to operate in society. Strive to develop spiritual qualities. Serve your brothers and sisters. From Sufi, John Isfaradas Abdallah, experience the reality of God in our own hearts. Promote social justice. Liberate God from the bondage of religions. Can we move it to the next page, Will? Oh, thank you. From Buddhism, Robin Caton, stop the suffering in the world, become awake, enlightened. Our path is in us. Bring joy, manifest mindfulness. From Methodist, Dan Sturtevant, follow Jesus, to love one another as he loves us. Allow yourself to be touched by the majesty of existence. Trust in the goodness of God. See God in each individual. From the Latter-day Saints, David Longhurst, follow God's commandments, love God and love each other. Learn from experience, serve the oppressed, discover the divine within, nourish relationships, connect with others, live joyfully. From Judaism, Rabbi Jerry Danzig, be a partner with God, love your neighbor as yourself, heal the soul of our country, expand and develop God's creation. Can you move on to the, oh, there we go, yes. From Sikh, Erica Baines, become liberated from the endless cycle of reincarnation. Be aware of and control our minds. Become unattached to possessions. Be in touch with God and be content. Allow the energy and light of God to shine through us. And that brings us to our progressive Catholicism, Sister Marylin Lacey. As you can see, most of these spiritual paths share some common golden threads. The Big Questions has been sponsored by the Interfaith Council of Rossmoor, Walnut Creek. So thank you, Will, for that. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Sister Marylin Lacey, representing progressive Catholicism. She is a sister of mercy who is passionate about making the world a more welcoming place and has been working with displaced peoples since 1981, many of whom I think Will was referring to in his introduction also. Although she holds a master's degree in social welfare from UC Berkeley and 4 honorary doctorates, she insists that the poor are her best teachers. In 2001, Sister Marylin was personally honored by the Dalai Lama as an unsung hero of compassion. What a beautiful title, Unsung Hero of Compassion. For 2 decades, Marilyn directed the refugee and immigration programs for Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. She has also worked in refugee camps overseas. As the founder and executive director of Mercy Beyond Borders since 2008, Marilyn is now spearheading innovative programs in South Sudan, Haiti, Uganda, Kenya, and Malawi to lift women and girls up from extreme poverty. Her spiritual memoir, This Flowing Toward Me, a story of God arriving in strangers, was published by Ave Maria Press, Notre Dame, Indiana. It's amazing how one person can do all of these things. I would like to present Sister Marylin Lacey.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction. And I really hope that everybody who's joined us today that you will share your wisdom with me during this discussion afterward, because believe me, although I am an elder myself, it's rather frightening to be speaking to dozens of my elders who have a lot more wisdom and probably a lot more insight than myself. Actually, you've probably heard the comment from, I think it was Tim Conway decades ago, who said, quote, "Lately I've been thinking an awful lot about the hereafter. In fact, every time I walk into a room, I have to stop and ask myself, now, what did I come in here after?" And I'm already at that stage myself, so I hope I can stick to my points for this conversation today. Sarah introduced me as a progressive Catholic. I don't know where she got that title exactly, or it's the first time I've been called that, but I've been called many things. So I hope I can offer at least someone who is Catholic, who remains Catholic despite many challenges, my point of view on the purpose of life. I've had the great privilege of working with many, many cultures from around the world, both here in the Bay Area and in their home countries. And I think because of that, the structure of Catholicism doesn't interest me very much, and the dogma and all that goes with the historical accretions. But at its heart, as many of the other speakers apparently have attested, it's about the spirit of that the religion is trying to convey and trying not to get in the way of. So let me begin with a Sufi story. I love the Sufis, and the title of my book, my memoir, is taken from a Sufi poem. As background to this story, you will be aware that in many cultures, it is extremely rude to point your feet at anyone who is older than yourself or higher in rank. And that is the reason that Muslims always pray with their heads toward Mecca, toward the east, so that it's the head that's facing the divine and not their feet. So here's the story. A Sufi pilgrim was on his way to the mosque for Friday prayers. And the sun had been hot and the journey long, so he was kind of weary, and he got close enough, but he thought, let me just lie down here under this tree for a few minutes to rest before I go to my prayers. Well, he was barely asleep before somebody grabbed his shoulder and was shaking him awake. And he looked up, and there was this man, and he was yelling at him, "Sufi, get up!" And the hand was not gentle, and his voice was not very kind. "Some Sufi you are," the man continued. "You're a disgrace." And he paced and he flailed his hands. He was so upset at him. "How dare you lie down at the time of prayer with your head pointed toward the west and your feet pointed toward God in the holy shrine?" The pilgrim Sufi stirred a little bit, and he opened his eyes and he said, "Well, sir, I thank you for your concern." And then he started to smile a little bit and he said, "So could you help me? Would you kindly turn my feet in some direction where they will not be pointing at God?" Now, clearly, to a believer in any tradition, there really is no place without God. And at their very best, all religions are encouraging us and supporting us to seek the divine and experience the divine in every place, and then live with the consequences of how it changes us. But at their worst, which we see a lot about these days, at their worst, religions pretend to know everything about God and God's place, and oftentimes to confine God to a particular place. Christianity, certainly guilty 1,000 times over. And for that reason, I personally abhor the word missionary, because it implies that we go forth to change other people and twist them around to our way of believing. I much prefer the word emissary, which carries the connotation of someone who's representing someone else in the world. And an emissary, understood this way, for a Christian to be an emissary would mean being so in love with God and how that showed itself in the life of Jesus, that we would act with the values of Jesus, and people would come to see God through those actions: compassion, inclusivity, crossing borders.
It's got words as well.
Not judging, but being a storyteller, a healer, a friend, and living values that are not readily acceptable by most people in the world because they are so upsetting to us, literally turning our value system around. And in the life of Jesus, this got him in trouble with the powers that be, to the point where it got him killed, but not before he actually forgave his killers. So to be an emissary of that is quite a calling. And I don't think I or anybody else could sum that up in 30 minutes, but I'll try. And I'll do it under 3 headings. First of all, being here. Secondly, being there. And lastly, being bread. And we'll take each of them separately. So Will, you can show the first slide. Okay, change my view here so I can see what's put up. Okay, good. So what do I mean by being here, being the first element of what it means to be a Christian? I think St. Columba, way back in the 6th century, Irish or Scottish monk, said it best. He was a pilgrim traveling all around the islands there. And somewhere in one of his journals or something, he wrote the comment, a prayer really, "May I arrive at every place I enter." That really stopped me when I read it in a book by Belden Lane, who, by the way, is a marvelous, readable theologian. In his book, Backpacking with the Saints, he quotes it. What I take this to mean is we're all out and about, even during COVID. You know, we're here, we're there, we're everywhere. We're entering into conversations, we're entering into Zoom meetings, we're entering into whatever. But do we really arrive? Are we present? Or are we thinking about the next gig or taking notes on what you have to do tonight when you get home or whatever? But the challenge of being present is an extraordinary hurdle for me. I'm somebody who's at least 10 steps ahead of myself. How would my life be if I really were present everywhere I was and with every person I connected with? And I think this is the purpose of prayer, of meditation. The Eastern religions have done this much better than the Western religions, to sink into the present moment and to find there the God who loves us without condition, to be attentive to that and to begin to believe it, that each of us is beloved in the eyes of God, completely changes everything. It might take you a lifetime to get to that belief that you really are beloved, or it might come to you in a flash, or an extraordinary experience such as Jesus had at the Jordan River. Because once we are lovingly beheld, then we in turn can lovingly behold, which is the second phase, being there. But let's talk a little bit more about what it means to be here. I was reading a very unusual book about a woman who lived with nomads in Western Africa, actually in Mali. She lived with them for almost a year and traveled with them. And she said they were pretty self-sufficient. They were cattle herders, and they would go in search of grassland. And now and then they would stop at a town to get supplies. And of course, the townspeople would say, "Oh, where are you from? Where are you coming from?" And the only way they would answer is by saying, "We are here now." Not where they came from, not the struggles and difficulties they had on the journey. No, just none of that matters. What matters is that we are here now. We are here. We are with you. We are present. Again, that challenge to be in the moment, which even John Muir, famous John Muir, who walked the Sierra Nevadas and so famous for his love of nature, he writes that the origin of the word saunter, S-A-U-N-T-E-R, is from the Middle Ages, when many Christians went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And when they would pass through different towns and villages, people would say, "Where are you headed?" And they would say in French, "À la Santerre," to the Holy Land. So they became known as saunterers, we would say, because the land on which, the ground on which you are standing right now is Santerre. And so John Muir says we should never hike through the mountains. We should saunter. We should relish every step. We should learn to be present and find the divine in that. I am not at that point yet, and I don't know where I'll ever get to that point, but it is my very real conviction that I am beloved of God. And that is so freeing that it enables me to let go of other things and, go and work in refugee camps and other places. God's tenderness toward me helps me be tender toward others and toward the challenges in the world. It is not common, however, that people sit and meditate and come to experience that they are beloved of God. And absent that, we become very fractious, jealous, hateful, and we see it in the news every day. And I see it in South Sudan where I work. The women and girls there are amazingly resilient, but the men are taught from the time of their birth to be vengeful. They're actually taught. There's a lot of inter-ethnic killings and cattle rustling and all manner of things. And so if you are born a boy child in South Sudan, as soon as you're old enough to understand, your relatives will say, "Do you know why we named you Deng? Because that's the name of your uncle who was killed by such and such a tribe. And your mission in life is to avenge his death by killing someone in his family." So if that's our starting point as a world, we have a long way to go. We need to start by being here. And I will tell you something that happened to me after the day I spent with the Dalai Lama. It was a very precious day, and I could talk an hour or two about what I learned from the Dalai Lama, but I actually learned something even more amazing, I think, from a person I met the next day. So I got up the next morning and I opened up the Mercury News to read with my breakfast. And there on the front page, in color, was a photo of the Dalai Lama embracing me. And my first thought was, oh, this is very cool. My mother is going to love this. You know how parents are always proud of their kids, you know. So I was happy because I had spent time with the Dalai Lama. After all, he's the most famous refugee in the world, and I've devoted my life to working with refugees. And so it was very cool. So I was thinking about that as I drove to work, down to my job at Catholic Charities. And I stopped to get gas. And I was thinking about the Dalai Lama the whole time. So I finished, I get back in my car, and I start to drive out. And I heard the most horrible sound that you never want to hear when you are leaving a gas station. Perhaps you can guess. It's a metallic screeching sound, like that. And I looked in the mirror and I could see, to my horror, that I had forgotten to take the gas out of my, the hose out of my car. And so it was now swinging wildly, and gas was spewing around, making puddles until it shut itself off automatically. Well, I was horrified. And it was certainly a case that I was not here now. I was dreaming or daydreaming about the Dalai Lama and paying no attention really to what I was doing. So I jumped out of my car and I'm reaching in to get my purse because I figure I have to get my insurance card or whatever, help clean up the mess. And as I did so, I saw this little man running out from the booth, and he was running toward me, and he was waving his hands like this, just waving his hands. And he didn't look happy. He was running toward me, and he got close to me, and all of a sudden he stopped and he put his hands together as in prayer, and he bowed down from the waist, and he said to me, "Oh, it's you." Well, at first I didn't get it. And then he said, you're the one in that photo. And I realized he must have been reading the Mercury News. Turns out this guy was Tibetan. How lucky is that? And he recognized me from the photo because I was wearing the same jacket I had been wearing the day before. And so I said to him, "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I've just ruined your day here. I've made a mess, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "No, please. It is an honor that you come to my place of work." And I'm like, what? And I didn't get it. And so I said, "Well, let me at least pay for the damage." And he said, "No." And he's shaking his head at me like, "Why don't you get this?" He said, "No, no, no, no. But one thing only, may I touch you?" And then I got it. Because Tibetans believe that the Dalai Lama is the incarnation of the divine. And he knew from the photo that the Dalai Lama had touched me, embraced me. And I'm sure that would have been a dream of his life, that could happen, that he could meet the divine one-to-one. But instead, he did the next best thing. He said, "Can I touch you?" And through me, perhaps he could reach the divine. Now I tell that story because, first of all, his attentiveness to me was stunning. Deep attentiveness. He saw the beloved in me. He saw that spark of the divine that I had been touched with. He could have just looked at me and seen an old lady wrecking his gas station, which would have been true, but he didn't. He looked beyond that and he saw something precious. I do believe if we learn to live in the here and now, we will be able to begin to see one another in that light. So the next time somebody cuts you off on the freeway or gets in your way of a promotion or drives you crazy at the dinner table by telling the same story 10 times. Instead of looking at it as an annoyance, you see beyond all that to the beauty of the person. And that is where we meet the divine. So Rilke, another favorite poet of mine from Germany, he says, we are cradled, he's talking about God, he says, we are cradled in your hands and then lavishly flung forth. And that is my experience, that cradled in God's presence, we feel ourselves to be beloved, and then we don't get to snuggle up in a cocoon and just enjoy that. We can't nest in God's love. We are lavishly flung forth. I love that expression by Rilke. Lavishly flung forth. So for me, being a Christian is not a cocoon. It's not a safe place where I can retreat. And it's certainly not a place of dogma and answers. It's a catapult. It pushes me, it flings me, as Rilke says, beyond my comfort zone to where I have to cross borders. I have to welcome strangers. That's what following Jesus is all about. Why? Because once you go deep enough in that first phase we just talked about, being here, truly here, being beloved, you recognize you're not the only one. You're not special. This is everyone's reality. We are all beloved of God. We are all connected. And faith aside, we're learning this from quantum physics today. I'm not a genius in any of this, but I do know that they have verified the idea of, the fact of entanglement. That's the physics word for it. That if you were able to somehow nudge or bump an atom here in California, another atom, maybe in China or Australia, would feel bumped at the same time because atoms are entangled. And what are we made of? What is all creation made of? Atoms. So everything is quivering with the interactions that we have, whether we know it or not. We all belong to one another. And therefore, compassion and inclusion are like the two highest values in my life. And hence the name I gave my nonprofit, Mercy Beyond Borders. We have to learn to be compassionate outside of our comfort zone toward people who are different from us, right? And if we are not that way, we are hurting ourselves as much as we are hurting our quote unquote enemies. So when you think of this, it gives you different eyes. I think it gives you divine encompassing eyes to look at all the woes in the world and to feel catapulted to do something about it. Whether it means for me, flying over to South Sudan or living in a refugee camp or trekking through the mountains of Haiti, places where we're running projects right now, or pulling out your checkbook to, help someone else do it, or at least speak of these things to people who would like to close our borders and pretend that we are self-sufficient without one another. So the third reality that I think shapes my life and should perhaps be uppermost for every Christian is the idea that we can become bread. We can actually become nurturance for one another. And this, of course, is a central symbol in Christianity, the Eucharist, the thanksgiving for bread shared and bread as life, bread as sustenance. There is another Sufi poem. You can tell I'm enraptured with the Sufis. And I know that Rumi, for one, had many friends who were Christian and Jewish and from other traditions. He really was a very deep deep mystic. And the deeper we go into the reality of being here, the more connected we all are. You can't avoid the fact that no one is to be excluded. So his poetry is very powerful. I use it to pray. And this is one of my favorites, very short. He says, be the one who, when you walk into a room, luck, or I would say blessing, flows to the one who needs it most. Even if you've not been fed, be bread. Even if you've not been fed, be bread. What a challenge. What a challenge. Think of all the rooms you walk into, metaphorically or physically, and there are other people in the room. Are you free enough to say that all the goods you have, all the fortune, all the blessing could flee from you and flow to someone else who needs it the most? And even if you've not been fed, even if you've not been feeling affirmed or promoted or happy or noticed or, whatever, even if you're not in a great position to be bread, you can still choose to be bread. I take this to mean that this is the path to joy. And I know it's been true in my own life. And I can recall 50 years ago when I first entered the convent, one of my mentors saying to me, one of the sisters, if you're ever feeling depressed or discouraged or like giving up, go and do something for someone else. And she was right. It works. So when we recognize the here, that God is with me at all times and that he is beholding me as his beloved, or her beloved. Sorry, it's hard not to anthropomorphize, but when we talk in English, when we sink into that reality of being here, we're pretty much catapulted into being there. We've got to be there for other people. And how we do it is up to your own skills and talents and all of that. But it must involve being bread, because it is essential. The Greeks called it kenosis, self-emptying. And it certainly was true in the life of Jesus. He didn't cling to anything. And he gave his life for others, even to the point of dying on the cross. So that's a pretty high standard, a pretty impossible role model. And yet, if you are a Christian, you believe that that same spirit lives in you. And so the more we empty ourselves, not for the sake of emptying, not for the sake of cleaning out our closets and throwing it in the garbage can. I mean, emptying in the sense of sharing the resources, whatever you have, with others. And dropping this idea of being self-sufficient and recognizing we are in this massive solidarity with all of creation, the whole universe, or the multiverse, as Facebook would say. And that energizes us, right? Because right now we're not on a level playing field. No matter what we suffer here in the US, we have safety nets, we have ways of protecting ourselves from a lot of the suffering and want that is common in 90% of the world. So when you see there is no us and them, it's all we, then it becomes really obvious and stupid to have these tribal enmities, right? And by tribal, I don't mean just Africa. I mean Congress. I mean family divisions. I mean religions pitted against one another. There are all kinds of tribes. And therefore this necessity of moving beyond borders is like what's going to heal the world. And for me, it has meant the welcoming of strangers. Because God is the ultimate stranger. So if you have any desire to meet God, I think that's how you're going to do it. It certainly has been true in my own life, and it's why I wrote the memoir, This Flowing Toward Me. It's God's benevolent, loving gaze flowing toward me. But the subtitle is Meeting God and Strangers. And that's been my real experience, and the book is just stories of certainly how no one religion or no one person could ever understand the divine. But the more cultural insights you have and perspectives, the more chance you have really of leading a joyful, fulfilled life. And of course, that's what we all want. So let me end where we began, with the Sufi pilgrim asking the question, could you please turn my feet so they're not pointing toward God? Because it's impossible. Everything can be a sign and a symbol and a crack through which we can enter into a new way of looking at the world. So I've suggested 2 questions for our discussion. You can put up the next slide, Will. The first question is, what do you think is your natural tendency? Is it more toward being here, or is it more toward being there? And how does that show up in your life? And secondly, what if you took seriously this call to be bread? What might that mean for you? How could it possibly change your life in small daily ways, or maybe a big way? So I'd open it up to just a couple minutes of quiet to consider those questions, or to come up with a comment, a sharing of your own that you'd like to bring to the table here for everyone's enjoyment. So just a couple minutes of silence for being here. Okay, my last summing up comment would be, I presented this as if it were 3 phases, but I don't want you to think that they're chronological. Being here, being there, being bread, it's all together. And we're constantly learning and experiencing how to be that way. Okay, any?
I'll just invite folks to use the reaction button on the bottom right, and there's a little raise hand function there. And because we have so many people in our meeting today, we have 50 folks, that will make it easier for us to call on you. Use the raise hand and reactions in the bottom right.
I'll begin. Is that what you mean by the raised hand? Is the thumbs up, I guess?
Thumbs up or the hand or emoticons, that just gets us up to the hand actually gets you to the front of the queue, where it'll be easier for you to see while we're listening to folks and making their face big enough to read lips.
Oh, good. I didn't know that. Well, thank you, Sister Marylin. You have the ability, God gave you the ability to bring us into the now. And I appreciated very much the silence which you offered us to sort of take into our hearts and souls the richness that you've shared with us. So this is the time for all of us to share our experiences, to answer the questions that Sister Marylin has put. I kind of like that. Which comes more naturally to you, being here or being there? So we can take that on. And if anybody has something to share, please let us know. I mean, by the hand.
Brother Nazir has his hand raised.
Oh, yes, go ahead. quite.
Please unmute yourself, brother, and turn on your video so we can see you as you're asking your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful, beautiful presentation. It can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Touch my heart at multiple levels. The meaning of presence. To be present is not to be here or to be there, as I understand it, as a Sufi. It is to be present. When you love, you don't want to be either the lover or the beloved, as long as there is love. When the beloved and the lover both vanish, what remains is love. When you have fire, you don't want to be either the wood or the fire. All you want is to be the warmth of the fire, as was experienced with Moses when he was on the mount, when he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Arani, show yourself to me. And Allah says to him, you cannot see me, lantarani. As long as there is you, there is no me. So the getting in is neither here nor there, because it's spaceless and timeless. It is to be with him or her, the love. All that remains is love. There is a beautiful concept in Sufism called hadara. Hadara is to be present. And the Sufis practice that during their recitations, hadara. And there is a word that has come out of it called hadrat, except that it has lost its original meaning. They interpret that to mean in Urdu and Farsi as being an old man, an elderly person, but really means someone who is present in the presence of God, in the presence of the beloved, in the presence of love. I'd like to end by sharing, since you mentioned the Dalai Lama, when I was in India attending a conference in 2007 in Amritsar, I gave a little talk on I need you to know myself. The Dalai Lama liked it so much, he dragged me by the hand on the way out into his chamber, held my right hand, sitting on my right side for a whole hour. He was massaging the palm of my hand, and he was telling me beautiful things, the whole hour of it. Just wanted to share that with you. And later, I was told that what he was trying to do was to massage your heart. That's the way they reach you. Anyway, just a comment.
Lovely.
Thank you, Nazir. Your sharing is always so rich. It's so good to see you here. Okay, any other hands that we see up? Anybody else?
Harvey Weinstein asked the question, what are your thoughts about the power of humility, in the chat room?
Is he asking everybody, or
You especially, but
power of humility? Well, I think we see it certainly in the lives of the great saints and the founders of the great faith traditions, that it was never about them. It was always about seeking or revealing the divine. And it's their followers that have turned things into structured religions that often are very not humble, right? That often claim to know the truth, that often welcome only those who believe their versions of the truth, and all of that. So I think the closer we get back to the deep meaning of the divine, the more humility becomes attractive to us. Of course, we all know it comes from humus, meaning the ground we walk on. And things that don't seem important or don't seem fruitful actually can become that. when we accept that kind of self-emptying and take the lowest place. I heard a beautiful anecdote. This is a true story related by a theologian named Margaret Silf, S-I-L-F. She said she was on a tour once in the desert, and the tour guide was a Bedouin. And at one point, he bent down, they were walking across part of the Sahara. He bent down and picked up this very desiccated, dried up old seed. And he held it in the palm of his hand and he spat on it. And she said, I would not have believed it had I not seen it with my own eyes. That seed began to sprout immediately, to unfurl and grow right there in the palm of his hand. And she reflects on it and she says, you know, that gave me hope that when I feel like a dried up seed, I too could sprout, but it's probably going to happen when I'm spat upon. So to your question of humility, when I think we accept the difficult parts of life, when we're ignored or rebuked or whatever, and we don't try to fight for ourselves, but we accept it, something new grows in us. Mm-hmm. So if you're ever feeling spat upon by circumstance, maybe it's a blessing.
What a great story. Oh my goodness. Yes, Channing. Unmute, Channing. Channing, unmute yourself. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Marylin. That was extremely enlightening, very uplifting. And as I think of myself in my life, I think of myself being here, being there, and being bred. What my goal is to be present in all three of those. Not to have to be in the there and deal with a lot of the frailties of humanity without retreating to just being in my presence of God, but carrying that presence of God back into the world, and then also being able to have the humility to be the bread for the others. So my goal is to seamlessly, go between all of those three. But right now I tend to go from one to the other. And I don't go in any order, but I definitely will retreat, into solitude to regain my presence with God.
I'm seeing the masks on the wall behind you.
Yes, they're from Northern Africa.
I can tell. Wonderful. So you've had those experiences. Yeah. Thank you for that.
If I may speak to the question of humility, I worked with children for 50 years, and one thing that children do for you is they keep you humble in many, many ways. They're so honest, they're so real, they are so much in the now, in the present. At least I worked with children up through about the age of 11 or 12. I don't know what happens after that. I don't understand them at all. But the younger ones, they're so pure and real, and I just loved working with them for all of those years. So that's part of humility, is to see what it's like to be a child. In fact, I think Jesus said, unless you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. He wasn't talking about being childish, of course. Yeah.
And yet, isn't it true of most of us that we gravitate toward upward mobility, not downward mobility? We like it when we're famous and we love it when we have good fortune, and it's really countercultural, particularly for us Americans, to go to the margins of society, to be with people who don't matter much because they're not producers or consumers. And not to go there in a missionary way where we're trying to save them, but to erase the margins, to stand together as one, where we share our resources. And I think, I don't know, most of us are not easily catapulted in that direction. But I think that's where God's Spirit is always moving. It's very costly. No cheap grace, according to Bonhoeffer. And many times our churches want to be cocoons. Well, churches should gather us for the purpose of strengthening us and forming a community that then can go back out to the margins, right? Not just enjoy a cozy existence with one another. At least that's my understanding of Christianity.
Susan Dunn has their hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, I liked the concept of the here, there, and the bread. And I thought the Sufi thing, when you talked about love, brought it all together, because bread blessed and broken is how we are here and there and present, with Jesus all in one.
Exactly. Thank you.
Go ahead, Harvey. Go ahead. Unmute.
One of the reasons I asked about the power of humility is because I think you represent the power of humility. Any of us who've worked in refugee camps or overseas know that there tends very often to be a lack of humility in those who, quote, do humanitarian interventions.
Yes.
And an inability to actually be present for those who we are supposedly there to help in some way or assist. And I think it's so important for anybody who is working with the disadvantaged, whether it's internationally or locally, is to recognize how powerful humility can be, and a sense that we are all God's creatures and we are there to listen. Yeah. And I have always admired you, and I think that you represent that. And I thank you for it.
Well, thank you, Harvey. I don't represent it. I wish to, but I don't. I tell you, in my book, I've got probably 100 stories of times I've failed at doing that. I'm thinking right now of one of the lost boys of Sudan that I resettled in San Jose. And of course, when they arrived, most of them were Dinka, so they were 6 feet tall, 6.5 feet tall, really, and emaciated. So that made them look even taller. And I was tasked with, welcoming them, giving them transitional housing, and then finding them employment. Not me personally, but my team. And this was not easy, somebody who's 6'8" and, weighs 110 pounds, who's going to hire him? So one of the things that I strongly encouraged them to do was eat more than once a day. In the refugee camps where they had lived in East Africa for 12 years, most of them, they only ate once at night. And that was because, as one of them explained to me, you can distract yourself during the day from your hunger, but at night you cannot, and you cannot sleep. So they would have their grain, their porridge at night. So here I was one afternoon in San Jose driving this fellow, Anyuan was his name, to a job interview. And he just looked so weak. And, so I just out of the blue asked him this question. I'm driving along and I said, so Anyuan, have you eaten today? It was about 4 o'clock. He said, no, not yet. And I got so exasperated with him, me, the American, I know what's best for you. I said, I have asked you, please, you should eat breakfast. And he said, well, I wanted to, but my roommates were not fast enough. I said, Anyuan, what does this have to do with your roommates? They were living 4 to an apartment. And he said, well, I had to come to class, he said, but they weren't up yet. So I couldn't eat. I said, well, this has nothing to do with your roommates. Why couldn't you eat? And he almost wrenched the seatbelt out because he turned me so insistently, turned toward me, and he said, well, sister, I could never eat alone. And I'm like, yeah. You're right. Of course, eating is being bread for one another. Eating is sharing what little you have. Eating is the precious time of day. You would never do that alone. And I just shook and I said, welcome to fast food America. Where even children and parents don't eat together, and these kids don't have parents. All they had was one another, But time after time after time, I learned so much from these people that I supposedly was helping. It's just such a privilege to stand with them, as you know. And don't you wish everybody could have these experiences? So the most you can do is try to share how it's affected us. Write an article, give a talk, whatever. Start a nonprofit, as I did. It's an urgency to wake up to the truth of life. It's all we have is one another, and we can't sit in a corner of the world and have all these resources and pretend there aren't brothers and sisters and mothers and daughters that don't have what we have, and we're not going to share. I mean, it is mind-boggling to me. And that we don't see how that selfishness is killing us. It's not just killing them, it's killing us. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sister Marilyn, don't you think that part of why we don't go across the borders, even in our own neighborhoods, has to do with fear? I know
Absolutely.
I know it does for me. You drive around in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and you see these huge homeless camps and children playing outside, and that their life is just it's so borderline, and even walking down the street, you just pass somebody that you can see is just emaciated, and they have such need. But do I go and approach them and offer them, an apple? No, because I'm afraid. Although being an older woman, it gets a little easier. I can smile at almost anybody. And,
and they know you're not flirting, huh?
That's right. Exactly. But I think fear, and how do we get over that fear when we are around people that have less than we do? Much less than we do.
Yeah, St. Francis of Assisi, why is he everybody's favorite saint? Because he was so free. And he used to tell his brothers, the followers that became Franciscans, don't have possessions, because if you have possessions, you'll have to lock your door. And goodness, we not only have possessions and lock our doors, we live in gated communities. We are fearful of anyone who is different from us. And I think that it's part of the American individualism, that we just are self-sufficient, and then we look askance at anybody who is not already in our close circle. And the huge challenge, probably in all faith traditions, but certainly in the Christian one, is to cross those borders. And I would say that is one of the main purposes of church, that what we are scared to do alone, we can do as groups. So if you belong to a congregation of some sort, that congregation can take on housing the homeless, or opening an employment service, or figuring out how to hire these people to be gardeners or whatever, but you couldn't do it by yourself. And I know that when I started out in refugee work in 1980, I was a young nun at the time, and man, I thought I was going to leap tall oceans in a single bound. I was going to save the world and all these things. No. We each do it in our little corner, in our own small way. But when we join with other believers, much more becomes possible, I think. And so, especially around this fear issue, I think that's a lot of what is so fierce about the immigration debate. We fear people who are different from ourselves. And I don't fear it, because I've had this experience. It's so enriching to meet people from other cultures and sit down and talk with them and learn from them. And I just happen to be privileged in that way. But I recognize that most people aren't. And I mean, I have sisters-in-law who live in the Midwest and they've never met a Muslim. They don't know what a Sufi is. They never have talked to a Spanish-speaking person. Here in the Bay Area, we certainly have all those opportunities. And so shame on us if we don't take some opportunities to reach out. But there are whole swaths of the United States that just don't even have that awareness. And therefore they have become quite fearful, I think, of anything outside, which is of course where God is standing. So too bad for them. You know?
Thank you.
So if we have if there are no more questions, maybe I could put up my little thing on Mercy Beyond Borders, unless.
Well,
there's
let's
more
just see,
discussion.
because there's a lot of people here, and
We have
sometimes,
a couple of questions, Sarah, both from Ahmad and Dan.
okay, I can't see all of the hands. So,
Great.
Dan, go ahead.
Sister Marilyn, very, very nice to make your acquaintance. I'm sorry I was late, but as soon as I came in, I mean, what you were saying was just music to my ears, and especially talking about being bread. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently. And the way that I think about it is I had not thought of it as being bread, but the way that I'm trying to live is to be a blessing to others. And even more specifically than that, I'm trying to live so as to give other people reason to believe that the world is just, even if it's not, you know. The other comment, oh gosh, there's so many things I wanted to comment on. You were talking about the helpfulness of a church community, and church communities can be, or any kind of religious community can be helpful. They can also be, really insular, and they can become little tribes. And I was thinking of somebody who was describing, I'm a United Methodist. He was describing basically most United Methodist churches are like football huddles. As you approach them, all you see is people's backside. And what we have to do is stand up and turn outward. And I definitely think that.
That's a powerful metaphor. Wow.
Yes. It also has the advantage of being true. Anyway, just thank you so much.
So Dan, who are you? Are you a minister or?
I am. I'm a I'm the United Methodist pastor at the Tice Valley United Methodist Church here in Rossmoor.
Rossmoor, wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
be that presence. I love it. Some saint said this, and it's always stuck in my mind when I begin to get critical. The quote was, "Let only thoughts which bless take root in my heart."
Yeah. Yep.
How different our worlds would be, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, but you're
Anyway.
right. The tremendous potential of churches for being outward, welcoming, blessing, learning, integrating is really compromised in our world today.
Yep.
And I'm ashamed of the Catholic Church, except for our Pope. Francis is a good man.
Yeah.
I am really ashamed at what we
Yes.
have devolved into.
Well, and it's not just the Roman Catholic Church. It's
No,
most.
it's and the gospel of prosperity.
Yes,
What blasphemy that is.
it is. It
Utter
is.
blasphemy.
It's
So-
offensive. It really is. It really, really is.
It's really scary. So to have co-opted the gospel in the name of a political position or something is not only strange, it is dangerous, very dangerous. People seem to be swallowing it.
Sister Marilyn, thank you so much. I need to go on mute because my grandson just arrived and there's about to be noise. So.
That's wonderful. Let the little children come. All right,
Yes.
thanks.
There was somebody else who had their hand up that I didn't see. Would you please? Oh, Sunshine.
And Nazir, and then Gloria.
Oh, Nazir.
Oh.
Go ahead, please, Nazir, and then Sunshine.
Please unmute yourself, Nazir. We can't hear you.
Another powerful idea, beautiful idea introduced by Sister Marilyn is the idea of connectivity or interconnectivity. Obvious as it is, we lose consciousness of that fact of life. The fact that we are brothers and sisters genetically from a common mother and father that has been proven through biology, and of course, through our belief systems all the way going back to our father Adam and our mother Eve. But from a physical point of view too, this has been known for quite a while, namely that we don't live in an inanimate universe. We live in a universe that is knowing, that has consciousness. And the dialectic between wave theory and particle theory basically boils down to this. When you look at something, that something changes. When I look at you, you change. When you look at me, I change and you become a part of me. And that way, everything in the universe is connected one to the other. That's just from a perception point of view and a particle dynamics point of view. From a classical mechanics point of view, that we always had the theory of elasticity, just as there is elasticity in history, there's elasticity in sociology, there is elasticity in classical mechanics. When you touch something, that something is infinitely elastic. So that powerful idea of connectivity, if we could keep track of, keep it internalized, it would be such a beautiful world. Just wanted to latch on to that idea and reinforce it. Such a beautiful idea. Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nazir. You are a scientist and you understand, I believe you were a NASA scientist. What was your realm?
Yes, well, yes, I have several degrees in aeronautics and physics and other things.
Yeah, and you see how things are connected in the material world as they are in the spiritual world.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Sunshine.
First of all, I want to thank you, Sister Marilyn. I think I had the privilege of meeting you and connecting with you through Liz Lawhead at the very beginning of this journey.
Right.
And I maybe have said you were a progressive Catholic. Who knows? Because it is the word I like to because of my own Catholic roots, of which I have wonderful foundation from my Catholic roots, but I also have a path called Ananda, and it is really the purpose of life is to realize God and self-realization in all things as well as in ourselves. So, you know, when you were speaking, the things that brought me joy, especially was that emissary, using the word emissary instead of missionary. I too have always graded on that word, a missionary. And I do have felt like an emissary all my life for the same reasons that a lot of us feel, for spreading love, for spreading inclusivity, for being part of compassion. And I was very lucky at 24 to travel the world just by myself and become part of all cultures. And I was invited to dirt huts and drank from dirty cups that it crossed my mind I could be catching something, but to feel like I was actually got to be the guest that was God, because that was the cultural feeling, and their honor was that I was sitting down with them and sharing tea, taught me great lessons at a young age. And I have always gravitated toward be here now, and to wanting to be the bread and feeding people is just my natural ability. It may not be the poor or the poorest of the poor, but it certainly is anybody around me that I can feed. And my friends will attest to that, which brings me joy very much if you know about Anandamoy Ma, who was always said her strength wasn't meditation, but in feeding others. And anyway, I just thank you for coming.
For some reason, I have some friends who are Ananda followers also, and beautiful people. I want to tell just one more very quick story. Again, this is one of the refugees from South Sudan whom I resettled in San Jose. And I knew he had some health issues, but I didn't know exactly what they were. He had a caseworker helping him. And he called me one night after I was home. He said, Sister Marilyn, I need to talk with you. And I could tell by the way he was speaking that he was scared. You know how your lungs get tight, you know? And he said, I have to go to the hospital tomorrow. I said, yes, I heard you were going in for a procedure. And he said, yes, but well, he said, the doctor told me that I should sign some papers tomorrow, whether I would like to give my heart. And he was petrified. He was absolutely petrified. And I listened to him more, and I realized that he thought they were going to take his heart out. He was, you know, it's obviously the organ transplant paperwork, but he didn't understand it. So as he was fumbling to try to understand it, he said to me, Sister, why would I want to give my heart to a stranger? And it was such a profound question. And I thought, well, that really gets at everything. Why should we give our hearts to a stranger? Not in the sense of organ transplant. Well, yes, maybe that, but in the sense of everyday life. Why should we give our hearts to strangers? It's because that's how God is.
Right.
God is including everybody and beholding everybody with affirmation, you know? And so to withhold anything, even our own hearts, from people who are different, doesn't make sense if you come from a faith tradition, you know. So anyway, it impressed me. Do you think I could talk for 5 minutes about Mercy Beyond Borders? If you let me screen share, Will?
You should be ready to go.
Okay. How do I do this? Exit. I just have to find the file. Hold on 1 second. Okay. All right, are we seeing anything yet? Don't see anything yet? Okay, hold on. Go back to this. Huh. All right, 2 more seconds, and if I can't find it, I can't find it. Huh.
While you're looking, I would just like to acknowledge the work that Will McGarvey does.
Yes.
And his team. Talk about somebody that uses spirituality and his church and his interfaith, the Interfaith Council to help people who are homeless, who are hungry. I don't know how many different arenas you work in, Will. I don't think I've even been able to count them, but I just want to acknowledge that you know, your incredible energy towards helping others. Thank you so much. I'm inspired. I am so inspired.
All right, can you see it now?
Great, yeah.
Now we can, yes.
Thank you, Will. So about 12 years ago, I started an organization called Mercy Beyond Borders. And
if you put it into play mode, we'll be able to see the text a little larger for our older eyes. That will be
I'll
good
do
for
it.
us. Perfect, thanks.
Okay, so our mission really is working with women and girls in extreme poverty and providing resources that allow them to learn and grow and connect and lead. So we're really trying to do a movement of lifting up women and girls who are born into poverty. You know, as Helen Prejean says, you know, just because you're standing on third base doesn't mean you hit a triple, you know. So anybody born in Europe or the US is pretty much born on third base. So for those who haven't even reached first base, we want to be there with them. And currently working in 5 countries. You can see them listed there. They're Sudan, South Sudan and Haiti are 2 of the most miserable places I've ever been. So we have our work cut out for us. And I'm very energized by what we do. We work in villages and refugee camps, and we work with girls like this. And we give them the opportunity to go to school, which is not an opportunity that most of them would have otherwise. We follow them all the way through university. This is one of our graduates from nursing school, and she is now working in the village where she grew up. So those are her relatives standing behind her. So take a look at the transformation from a village where they would never have any opportunities to develop their own God-given talents and be somebody and be self-confident and have a voice and have agency. Education allows them to do that and to be utterly transformed. So we are very proud of what we're doing in the education of girls in these marginalized situations. And the other thing we do is we work with women in refugee camps, specifically in northern Uganda and northern Kenya, so alongside the South Sudan border, where there are 1.5 million refugees from South Sudan, from the ongoing conflict there. So they live in huts they build themselves. You can see this is one of them in northern Uganda, and this is the type of life women lead, subsisting on UN rations, which have been cut 40% in the last 2 years because of lack of funding at the UN. So they're barely eking out a living. And we provide loans and micro enterprise training so that they can start small businesses in the camps. These are 4 of our successful entrepreneurs. And it's quite a transformation. They're still sitting in the front of their hut. They're no longer just eking out a living. So that's the kind of work we do. We also do leadership training and advocacy training and things like that. But I hope that you'll take a look at our website if you have any spare time. And once a month, I write a 1-page e-news, which could come to your inbox if you care to sign up. If you go to that site, it's MBB at mercybeyondborders.org, and scroll down the main page. You could hear from me every month, and I usually just tell a story of 1 or 2 of the women or girls we're working with. These are 2 girls that are now both nurses, and instead of being refugees in the camp, they are serving the other refugees in the camp now in a professional capacity. So it's a work that gives me a lot of joy, and I invite all of you to join me in it. Thank you. That's it. And thank you to each of you who came and who listened and who participated. Thank you to Sarah, to Will, to everybody that I didn't have a chance to meet individually. Also on the website, you will see an email, info@Mercy Beyond Borders. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can do it that way. To speak to another congregation or a book club or anything you want. We're just here and there and trying to be bread. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Sister Marilyn. I feel just so uplifted. I feel like practicing what Jesus taught, which is, and he lived it. When Jesus was in the presence of a person, that's all he was doing. Mm-hmm. He was in that person's presence. So, you know, it's just a real joy to have you join us. And as a funny little, ending, speaking about humility, I too had the experience of getting gas and happily jumping in my car and pulling away with a pump thing, whatever that's called, in the gas tank. Mm-hmm. It was
horrifying, yes.
Horrifying and very humiliating. Unfortunately, I didn't do any great damage, but it really brings you into the present. Where were you?
Exactly. So we all have so much to learn, and thank God we have one another to learn from. So you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving and holy days at the end of the year. You can stay in touch through our e-news, if you wish. Blessings to all of you.
Thank you, and blessings on your work.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sister Marilyn, did you share the link where people can, did you want to put it in the chat room too? Just in case.
What a great idea. Remind me how to do that. Go to chat.
Go to chat and then just make sure it's pointing towards everyone in the room. And I can put it into the link afterwards as well. That would be great.
Okay. Send chat to everyone. So the link is mercybeyondborders.org or mlacey@mercybeyondborders.org. But it's hard for me to stay in touch with people all over the world. So I use the e-news as a way of sharing a small reflection cycle paragraph, and then a story, real stories of women and girls we're working with overseas. I think you find it inspirational. I certainly am inspired by the women and girls every day. And it's killing me not to be able to go and visit them in person, which I used to do every year. So waiting for COVID to be under control so I can resume that. We are a very small nonprofit, but a powerful nonprofit. And actually a private foundation gave us $1 million because they were so inspired by our work. I think that's pretty awesome.
That is.
Like, what? To whom does that happen? You know, well, it's kind of like symbolic of my life. Good people and good things always dropping into my life, encouraging me, keeping me energized to do this work. And I'm happy for having had the chance to hear personally from some of you. And perhaps that will continue in the future. All right. Thanks again for listening. Our time is up. I'm an old teacher. I never go over time.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And
be well, everyone.
Hopefully we'll see some of you next year, and do let us know if you have an idea for a big question for next year. The committee is going to be considering what one big question we can spend a whole year on. So you've got my email, let me know.
How about choosing 12 nonprofits to talk about their good work here, there, and everywhere? You only have to think of 11 other ones.
Oh, that's a powerful idea too.
That's it. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thanks again, Will. Thank you again for everything, and for all of you who have shown up. We'll see you next year. If you're on the list, you will be notified of the big question and when we're going to meet.